Hey, everybody, welcome back to Searching for Political Identity. It's great to be with you. I got to say, it has been a rough 6 weeks or so for me at work. Been pretty stressful, but it's all behind me now, and I'm feeling very relieved. So it's great to be back, and it's great to not be stressed out. I have a great episode for you today. What I did was I had a friend of mine named MJ from New Jersey. He's an attorney. He's an old friend. He's a three-time Trump supporter. He's an old friend, but he's actually a really close friend of my best friend's older brother. So we knew each other for a long time, and he's a great guy, very, very smart guy, very knowledgeable. He really impresses me. Talking to him last night, so we talked for an hour. We caught up. We talked about the first 2 days of the Trump second term, and it was phenomenal. And I was like, wow, because I've hosted so many people in the 3 years since I had MJ on last, and I was kind of impressed with how good of a guest MJ is. So kudos to you, MJ. It was great to have you back. So enjoy this. Before I let it roll, I will say that I feel a little bad. I had a very highly esteemed progressive man set up for February 1st. I was really looking forward to it. An award-winning author, wrote a lot of books on FDR and Thomas Paine, and I was looking forward to talking to him about what he wanted to talk about, which was how the Democrats lost the working party and how they can regain them. But he said, based on my posts, that I was too devoted to Trump and MAGA for him to feel comfortable appearing on my show. I do understand on one hand. I get it. I do understand. On the other hand, I do wish that he would have been willing to do the show anyway, because I told him we don't need to talk about Trump. We can talk about whatever you want. And we said that privately to each other. But nonetheless, he pulled out, and I feel a little bad about that. But I guess you can't win them all, and you can't sit on the fence forever. And I guess choosing a side has consequences. I wish he hadn't canceled. I would have loved to talk to him, and I still would love to. So, yeah, that's what I'm doing with the podcast. I'm not done talking to people from different backgrounds just because I voted for Trump. No, no, no. So there's that to say. And then that's it. I told you work's been killing me. I told you MJ's awesome and you're going to enjoy this. And I told you I had someone cancel on me. That was really all I wanted to talk about. So thanks for being here. Enjoy this, and I'll see you next week. Bye. We're live. Okay. There we go. There's my counter. All right. We got two. MJ, I like to start when we have one person respectful of everyone's time. Welcome back, bro.
Thanks, man. Good to be back. Good to see you. You look fantastic. The bar agrees with you, by the way.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I can't believe it. Can you believe it, bro? We did it.
I know when I passed, I printed out the document, held it up in the air, and just like raised my fist. Like I actually accomplished. I looked like Bender at Breakfast Club at the end.
Yeah. I ended up going to the FedEx store right across the street to get sworn in by the guy who sends mail. It was classic. We got a photo. So very Escow style, but proud moment. Thanks for that. Following your footsteps. It's great to have you back, man. I can't believe that we haven't kept in touch really since, what was it, 3.5 years ago since you did a couple shows.
It's been a crazy 3.5 years.
It's
a lot
crazy.
Of developments, you know. So
I guess let's tell the audience what we did. We started right in the thick of COVID. You joined me. We had a blast. We had 3 really good conversations back-to-back weeks. And audience really liked it, and we had a good time. So we're back chopping it up. It's good to see you.
Postmortem on Biden and the first interesting 48 hours on Trump. So here we are.
Yes, exactly. So first of all, how are you the same MJ? Have you changed at all? What is anything different about your political outlook?
I think the last time we spoke, I was still doing matrimonial, and I went back to legal aid, which is always going to sharpen a distrust of the state. But largely, I've gotten a little more. I'll be honest. Largely over the last 3 years, like most other Americans, I've gotten a little more entrenched in how I feel about things. A little more vocal, especially. I was a big believer that there was a lot. Even taking the 2020 election into account, there was still 70 million people that voted the way I did, and I think a lot of the propaganda is trying to convince you you're alone if you vote a certain way when you're not. Clearly, you just won the popular vote. So I've gotten. I'm not antagonistic with people at all. Especially at work, I try to drop my politics. There are times in the course of public defense that I have to do things that might run counter to it, but you check your politics at the door. Like you have a job you have to do, and that's the end of it. It's business. So, but certainly, if anybody wants to have the conversation, I'm in. I feel a lot more. I don't want to say I don't want to say confident in my beliefs. I've always been confident in how I feel about
Emboldened.
things. Emboldened. I think it's a great word to put it. Emboldened, just saying like, running counter to some of the stuff you hear, and also providing criticisms that I think some on the left don't consider because they're too wrapped up in their own version of what Trump is and Trumpism and criticisms of it that, sometimes they can't. I would say sometimes they can't see the forest from the trees, and they don't consider other aspects of his presidency that might be objectionable to people on the right. So,
yeah. So
on the right,
about,
so to speak.
Talk to me about Biden.
I mean, look, the proof's in the pudding. I think he went out with I don't want to say dismal economy. I think we are a little bit on a recovery, but I think it was a bad 3 years from an inflation point of view, as we all know, and a lot of that was global, but a lot of that could have been prevented by not overheating stimulus spending and not overheating spending in general during its term. Like, you talk to any economist in a time of inflation, what you should probably not do is increase government spending, and we did a lot of that. And I think, more so than anything else, that's what people voted with their wallet, I think, this time around. I really do. I think people were tired of having high inflated energy bills, inflated grocery prices. What's going to be done to change that? I don't know. I know a lot of people seized on Trump's interview in Time where he said, listen, once prices are set at a certain level, it's hard to go down, which is true. But if you look at the second part of that quote, which of course nobody brings up, he actually says, I think we could fix supply chain issues. I think we could ramp up domestic energy production, and that'll pass along a saving to the consumer. No one talks about that aspect of it. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. But unquestionably, he's not incorrect. Once prices are set at a certain level, it's hard to ever go back down. But I think certainly a lot of people voted the expectation that we need to, because grocery prices are out of control. I think, as much as I don't think the president can effectuate changes on gas prices, I think when you're sitting on a lot of natural reserves in your own country and you're just not drilling, you might actually be able to change how much gross production you have domestically. And therefore, if you have more product and it's more ample, it's obviously going to be cheaper. I do think that, in terms of Biden, I think he artificially lowered the price of gas just by releasing our reserves, and I thought it was a tactful decision in terms of trying to run for re-election. And that, look, whether it's true or not, whether I can prevent this or not, people are going to harp on gas prices. So if we have reserves, release them, so at least we can lower the cost to the consumer. But at the same time, we have reserves for a reason. Once those get depleted, what are we going to do? It's just setting the stage for a possible shortage, which would be a disaster. The whole world, the country still runs on gas, and more people are buying electric cars, but predominantly everybody's using gas powered cars. And if we have less product in terms of a reserve, obviously that's going to be a problem down the line. So,
yeah, you say people voted with their wallet and for
I
common
think so.
sense.
I think it was. I really do. I think as much as it was common sense, I think people just really this time voted with their wallet and saying, you know what, things are too expensive. We've given the other side 4 years, more than that, really, when you consider Trump really only had 4 years. Preceding that, we had a Democratic president for 8. So really 12 out of the last 16 years have been run by Democratic administrations. And unfortunately, I think really the failure to tackle inflation on a more meaningful level, and this isn't just Democrats. I mean, you have a lot of congressional Republicans. I think the only thing that they're put in office for is to spend people's money, whether that's to the Ukraine, whether that's to other initiatives that people might not, it's hard to justify foreign aid when people are having trouble making it. And I'm talking about people in the middle class, not just your historically lower class. Traditionally middle class employers are having a hard time making ends meet and living paycheck to paycheck.
Well, that is part of the MAGA argument, right? Like, if you're not taking care of your own people, how are you sending money abroad?
Yeah. And I understand it's very nativist, but at the same time, I think it makes a lot of sense. Certainly, I know Trump just pulled us out of the Paris Accords again, which to me was nothing besides a wealth transfer bill. I don't know how, regardless of whether we can do an entire show, obviously, on climate change, whether it's man-made or a natural occurrence. If I even accept the premise that it's man-made, and I do, okay, your solution via the Paris Accords is so non-effectual, considering that the two biggest pollutants in the world are China and India. There is absolutely nothing in terms of a penalty if they don't ramp down emissions. We could lower our emissions to zero. And it really would just be a drop in the bucket when you consider how many pollutants China and India are putting in the atmosphere. So if that's the case, why are we spending hundreds of millions, billions of taxpayer dollars on this agreement? What is it doing for us? Especially at a time where, like I said, there's not. there's a natural disaster in North Carolina that I think the federal government was very slow to react to. Obviously, what's going on in California, I think you saw a verifiable failure of state and local government to try to protect the Palisades and surrounding Los Angeles areas, to the point that the feds now have to get involved. And look, as a citizen, we lived through Sandy on the East Coast. I obviously I was thankful for the federal money. I'd so much rather my tax dollars go to helping out my fellow citizens in California. I have no problem with that. But where I have a problem with is when someone like Speaker Johnson gets demonized for saying, look, there has to be checks on this. He's right. The only reason why why we're issuing this money is because the supposed fourth biggest, I think, what's California have, the fourth largest economy in the world as a state? Fifth or something like that. The supposed fifth largest economy, in which your citizenship is taxed at a rate that really is the highest in the world, aside from maybe New York. They couldn't get the job done. State and local government, if anything, they had made cuts to their fire department. You had reservoirs that were totally depleted. And unfortunately, the situation that we saw was, as I said, I think you could trace it on top of the fact that, wildfires are a natural occurrence that are going to happen in that part of the country. Whether or not there was more arson than people want to let on, I don't know. I know there was anecdotal evidence of people setting fires, but regardless, I mean, we know wildfires happen in that part of the country. You have to be a little more prepared than they were. So whereas I don't have a problem with feds coming in and saying, look, we'll cover the cost of this, I think you have to. I think that's the job of the federal government. I also don't have a problem with Speaker Johnson stepping up and saying there's going to be checks and conditions on it, guys. It's not a blank check.
To California or abroad?
To California.
Oh, he did. I said that.
California. In terms of abroad, I think that was another thing people voted on, was we have all this money for the Ukraine, yet here domestically, you still have people in North Carolina living in tents and FEMA camps that their needs haven't been addressed. Look how long it took East Palestine and Ohio to get back on their feet when they had the spill. Like, this should not be happening in a country that's taxing its citizenry, in some cases, at 30%.
That's interesting. And that is, again, the core of the MAGA. Before you even get to the philosophy of each particular Israel, Ukraine, and the merits of each case, they say, so it's a very collectivist, if you will. And that's why it's really not libertarian. MAGA is fairly collectivist in a way.
In certain ways, MAGA's nativist, and I would say collectivist in the point of view of America first, being that we're all, we're going to put our country first before all others. That I guess that could seem kind of collectivist, but I also think inherent in America first is this belief in individualism, that the natural ingenuity of your American citizens, specifically, the free market, they're going to right the wrongs of a lot of societal ills.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. America first, but not the neo-Marxist America that the left wants, the traditional America. But it's a balance. And so that's why the searching for political identity thing for me is, even though I realize, and have for years now, and have only really embraced it in the last few months, that I align with the constitutional conservative point of view, there is even most people, I think yourself included, would agree that there is some role for some sort of socialism, on some level. And the question is, what level and how does that work?
I think we're always going to want to have a certain level of involvement from the federal government. I always just think it's a matter of how much. I tend to believe the less intrusive, the better. Leave it to the states. The feds are there almost as a fail-safe when the states fail. And I also think that the states are, I forget who the Supreme Court justice was that said it, but the states are the best laboratory to test certain initiatives before you go national with it. That's always been my belief, but people have different philosophies on it. Obviously, that's the whole argument between originalism and whether the Constitution is a living, breathing document. And get into that, which certainly I think we will, because as much as I voted for Trump, I'm not really happy about some of his executive orders in terms of essentially trying to repeal birthright citizenship via changing the 14th Amendment via executive order. And there's a lot of reasons for that.
Talk to me about that one.
Look, the problem you run into is, if you're going to have your own interpretation of the Constitution and try to change it via executive order, personally, we just talked about the fact that 12 of the
First of all, you're a big Trump guy, right?
Big Trump guy, huge. I voted for him twice, voted for him 3 times. Happy that he's in. Agree largely with a lot of what he's doing, which we could certainly get into what I agree with. I love the fact that he designated the cartels as terrorist organizations. Absolutely love it. Should have been done a long time ago. Kind of lifted the idea from Ron DeSantis, but that's okay. You take good ideas from people and disregard the bad.
Right.
But getting back to his executive order on birthright citizenship, the problem I have with it is, it's based on one person's interpretation, and it's not one person. Trump's obviously going to have, first of all, you already have 22 states announcing that they're going to sue to try to block it. And they're going to sue under the constitutional grounds that it's not the right forum. Should be decided by the Supreme Court either way. But either way, the Constitution says what it says, which is interesting because I think a lot of these groups that are suing normally wouldn't take
the originalist. Right.
Yeah, no, they're normally. It's so funny. I always say this, like, people that aren't originalists all of a sudden become Scalia-like in their interpretation of the Constitution when they want to talk about the 2nd and the 14th. All of a sudden, then penumbral rights aren't a thing, and what Blackmun said in Griswold v. Connecticut goes out the window. Then they're the biggest, strictest originalists you could possibly find. But in terms of the 14th Amendment, whether I agree with Trump or don't, first of all, I think we learned from his first term a lot of his executive orders, and we saw this with Biden. A lot of his executive orders, day one, get repealed by a further executive order. They're built on pillars of sand. And I think you have to plan, if you're Trump, on governing. First, he's obviously going to be term limited. And the hope is that he does so well that whoever 4 years from now takes over is someone of a like-minded ideology, whether it's Vance, whether it's DeSantis. Obviously, he does so well that people want another term of more of the same, and they vote for whoever the Republican is that's going to step in his shoes. But I think you have to plan on that not happening, just considering the way national politics have gone in the last 20 years. You've lost. Right. You haven't won a popular vote since 2000. This was the first time you won it since then. You've lost every election besides one. You lost 04, you lost 08. I'm sorry, you won 04, but you lost 08, you lost 12, you lost 20. So you lost 3 out of the last 5. So you kind of have to plan on worst case scenario, you losing, and then what happens 4 years from now? Another president comes in, he revokes all your executive orders. Everything that you just did was built on a pillar of sand because it's as easy as the next guy coming in and pulling it. So to me, regardless of whether or not I agree with ending birthright citizenship, agree with his interpretation of the 14th Amendment, to me, the proper forum, like anything else, is suing a specific organization or suing a specific group that's arguing in favor of it, going through the courts, reaching the Supreme Court, letting them decide it and interpret it the way they see fit. He has a favorable Supreme Court at this point, at least ideologically. I tend to think Roberts is a lot more of a moderate than people think he is. I think Kavanaugh is the very extension of Anthony Kennedy I thought he was going to be, whereas everyone thought he was going to be this far-right lunatic. I think procedurally Gorsuch is a lot more of a moderate than people thought they were. But certainly, right. I think you could say ideologically the court is center-right with Alito and Scalia. With Alito and Thomas being your far-right, not far-right, but your die-in-the-wool originalist extensions of Scalia interpreters of the Constitution. So again, just from that point of view, I'm more like, okay, it's great. You entered an executive order, and I feel the same way about the Paris Accords, by the way. You entered the same way. You entered this executive order. It's good for now, but again, what happens 4 years from now if Vance or DeSantis, whoever takes up the mantle, loses to whoever's going to be on the Democratic side, of which, obviously we're speculating 4 years from now. Their bench isn't that deep, but I do look at a guy like a Shapiro in Pennsylvania, and I could frankly see the national appeal, especially coming from a hotly contested swing state, especially if he governs as a moderate. I think I've always said this: America is largely a moderate centrist country. Our far left and our far right are promoted by the media because I think that's what gets clicks and that's what drives rage and that's what drives engagement. But largely, you talk to your common citizen, they're pretty much more politically or more socially liberal and more fiscally conservative. I think we've been that way since I was in high school. Not much has really changed on that point of view. It's just people have gotten more entrenched by the division. And I think we've had leaders say some irresponsible things that kind of paint the other side as one way or another, but it is what it is. Those are the times we live in. I'm not blaming one person or another. I know people like to blame Trump for that. I think that's kind of absurd. I think he entered a climate that was already very divisive. Certainly, he does.
Like who started it? It's hard to tell.
It's hard to tell. It's always hard to tell
because he was that guy in the media. He that's his game. He's just so good at it.
That's the thing. I tend to think he's actually used a lot of tactics from Democratic politicians and kind of turned it on them, and that's why they find him so confounding. But at the same time, he has a tendency to say things every once in a while, and all politicians do. Look, I'm not from Texas. I tend to like Ted Cruz. When Ketanji Brown Jackson was being vetted to be a Supreme Court justice, as much as I like Cruz, his criticism of her being a public defender and therefore having an affinity for criminality, like, dude, you're way smarter than that. Why would you?
That's interesting. I don't remember. I actually was paying close attention to that. I don't remember him saying that. That's weird.
And I would say the counterbalance to that is, did you not watch the Rittenhouse trial? Like, did you not see the state trying to I don't want to say railroad, but I can't think of another term for it. A
Yeah.
situation that was clear self-defense, a prosecutor that was looking to do something to embolden his career. So he was gonna try this kid for murder, even though he obviously had a legal defense. Everybody saw it on tape. He's getting attacked with a skateboard. What's he supposed to do? But I, I don't want to go too much of a tangent on that. But my point to Ted Cruz would be like, did you not see the value of criminal defense attorneys? You could easily be a public defender. I am one, and just have a healthy, I don't want to say hatred, but I would say a healthy, not even just a healthy skepticism of the state, because everything's balanced in their favor, right? Like they have the power of the government, they have the power of
I would like to think he misspoke, because I
I
remember.
would too. I was stunned when he said it. I was floored, because as much
Yeah.
as I think ideologically there's a million reasons why you could say she's going to be a problem on the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
That was so out of left field. Like, why? So my point is, politicians say, for lack of a better term, dumb shit all the time. And we're in a 24-hour news cycle where it gets amplified and it gets broadcast on Twitter. And then you have either your Benny Johnsons or Brian Tyler Cohens to retweet it to their followers, and it gets regurgitated. And all of a sudden people ascribe the thoughts of one to the many, which I would say, if you have a conversation with your local friend, coworker, whatever, if you guys can have that conversation, even if you don't agree, you're going to walk away still with a healthy respect for each other. At least I mean, for the most part, I'm able to. I'm not going to lie. Some friends have kind of ditched out because they can't stand the man. Hey, that's their prerogative. It's not going to change how I feel about things. I feel like I can justify.
Yeah, it's crazy how relationships have reorganized in this era, among other things. So much political realignment too.
Maybe I'm wrong. I don't think you saw that as much this election as you have in the past two. And I think part of it's just the fatigue of the last 12 years. I think people are just finally like, you know what, like, I know, whatever, you know, like you've had it for 12 years. Eventually everything passes, you know?
Right. It's so crazy. Oh my gosh. Speaking of swings, not just emotional swings and political changings, but talking about the executive orders, the swings of power. I've talked to so many people the last few years, particularly I'm thinking of a secessionist, a guy in Texas trying to, they say, man, hey, it's just the constant back and forth, and none of it's probably constitutional anyway.
I think it's a good point, especially in the constitutionality of it, because if you look at, again, I'll go back to the Paris Accords. It's a treaty. It's what it is. It's a multinational agreement between countries, like any multinational agreement. A bunch of countries get together in a room, they hammer out a deal. That is the very definition of a treaty. Constitutionally, treaties are to be proposed and passed in Congress and then ratified by the president.
This is like some sort of executive agreement, and so based on that,
well, we were entered into it by executive order from Obama. He was the original.
Well, there you go. So is it a treaty though?
The criticism back then was, this is a treaty. You're entering into it unconstitutionally. And to me, if I was Trump, forget about pulling us out via the EO. You right now have a majority in Congress, both in the House and the Senate. You mean to tell me there's not a back channel you can go through where you tell some member of the House of Representatives, listen, actually, and a Republican for that matter, listen, actually propose this as a treaty so you guys can vote it down. And then the situation, it's dead. Once and for all, it's dead. Because then if you get another president to try to come in 4 years from now, say a Democrat gets elected, and one of his first things is, we're going to re-enter the Paris Accords. Well, you can't do it via executive order because Congress already decided, and you're usurping their ability as a legislative body. So, and that's where I come back to the same thing with Trump, where it's like, I think look, I'm sure he's got all kinds of political advisors telling him why he shouldn't do this, and I'm sure expediency is a big part of it. But to me, like, on the outside looking in, just through looking glass, why not stay in? But then, or if you're going to remove us, at least start the process of trying to get it voted through Congress, because at that point, then you settle the issue. At least until, listen, elections happen, right? Midterms usually go against a sitting party. If in 4 years from now we wake up to a very different America where Democrats have the House and the Senate and then the executive branch, sure, there's nothing from stopping them to just reproposing the treaty and re-entering us in it. But at that point, it's a little more difficult at that point, a little more time consuming. And again, it's not built upon the pillar of sand of just going back to the secessionist point. As much as I don't know how smart seceding is, I like keeping all 50 states together. I love Texas, but as much from the point of view of like, look, they're all executive orders. They just flip flop. Half of them are unconstitutional anyway. There is merit to that point. Whether I agree with his larger premise of seceding, I don't think so. But like, there's absolutely merit to just the fatigue and the gridlock. And the fact that what they're doing is unconstitutional anyway. Like, what is the basis for any of this? We play a game in which the rules change every 4 years.
Right. So take me back to the birthright citizenship EO. What's your beef with it?
Well, my problem is, again, what's to prevent not only a Democratic president from coming in and saying this is a wildly inappropriate interpretation of the 14th Amendment? I'm going to institute my own. I'm going to pull it. Then all of a sudden we're back to square one. And I think we have a bigger quagmire now, because you have people that have already been deported that might have not been supposed to, might have actually had a constitutional basis for staying here, and that they were born here, even if their parents are alien to this country. Which fundamentally, do I agree with birthright citizenship? No, we're the only country in the world to actually do it. And I think I was reading actually some of the congressional discussion passing the 14th Amendment that wasn't really contemplated. And if it was kind of like a side effect. But at the same time, this is something, again, it's not the proper form to be handled by executive order. The proper form is through the Supreme Court or through Congress. And my problem is now you're setting a precedent where, okay, Democratic president gets elected 4 years from now. Not only can he issue an EO repealing what Trump just did on the 14th Amendment, what's to stop him from looking at the Second Amendment becoming the biggest? And this has always been my criticism with the left when it comes to the Second Amendment. You guys all of a sudden become the biggest and originalists because you hang on to the well-regarded militia aspect of it. Mm-hmm. Well, if that's the case, what prevents a president from saying, listen, Constitution clearly says, in the arms of a well-armed militia. It never said anything about private gun ownership. We're pulling it. We're doing gun buybacks. We're mandating gun buybacks, this, that, and the other thing. I can see them really using it as a way to attack the Second Amendment as we know it in this country, which was already under a very precarious position back when I thought Merrick Garland was going to be when Obama nominated Merrick Garland. I don't think people realize how close we were to having Heller overturned, to having the way we look at gun rights in this country.
Speaking of process, was that bullshit the way he was treated?
I don't think so, because
that's the mainstream narrative at the time. And again, I was just a mainstream guy at the time, so educate me on that.
I think Republicans could have done a lot better in terms of messaging. As much as the lame duck argument had some merit, because you had literally the future president, the current vice president at the time of the United States, giving the same exact argument when Reagan was trying to put people on the Supreme Court. It's bullshit. The better argument is elections matter. People voted us into the Senate. There is no way, as a Republican leading Senate, we can justify to our supporters, yeah, we're going to give a blanket confirmation to this guy who is so clearly coming after Heller, coming after gun ownership as we know it, which is a big issue to Republican voters. It always has been. It's a big part of the lobby. Like, you can't justify it. So I've never blamed them for that. The Senate's not a rubber stamp. In the same way Robert Bork was denied his confirmation, it's not unprecedented that we have presidents propose people, and if they don't have the majority in the Senate, you don't get confirmed. That's the way it is. What's the point of having a majority if you're not going to use it? So I never had a problem with them denying Merrick Garland his seat. I always thought the stolen seat thing was nonsense. Stolen from who? He doesn't own anything. It's up to the Senate.
What was it? Did they give him a proper hearing, and did he fail it? Or
they gave him my understanding was they individually vetted him and they gave him a confirmation hearing, but they told him before the confirmation hearing, we're not confirming you. So it was kind of a formality, but at the same time, again, if you're going to look at his record, it'd be no different. Okay. Fast forward 3 years from now, Alito decides to retire, which would be a tactical mistake in this hypothetical, because fast forward 3 years from now, Trump's a lame duck president. Democrats have overwhelmingly won the House and the Senate. Alito wants to retire. Trump wants to replace Alito with someone that so fundamentally agrees with Alito, doesn't want to bring back Roe v. Wade on a number of initiatives, is very much in line with the conservative wing of the Supreme Court. If Democrats own the Senate via the numbers, why would they ever confirm it? How could they justify that to their voters? People voted for a reason. You can't just disenfranchise people through formality. I'm sorry, it's ridiculous. I would think it's absurd. I wouldn't blame them for not confirming. If he didn't have the numbers, in the Senate, Amy Coney Barrett wouldn't be sitting on the Supreme Court right now. No way, not a shot.
Yeah, I mean, if it was just a case of him not having the numbers, then that's what it is.
It's again, elections. Harry Reid said it, and he said it under something very different, but it came back to bite him. Elections have consequences. Period. And cut and dry. That is it. We vote for our Senate to be the body that confirm and appoint. If they don't want to confirm and they don't want to appoint, that's their prerogative. And largely they're doing it as an extension of their constituency. And as much as I think Mitch McConnell needs to get out of the game, to me, it's the best thing he ever did was prevent Garland's ascension to the Supreme Court. Because again, I really do think DC versus Heller would have been overturned. I think the way we look at individual gun ownership in this country would have been overturned. I am a big believer in the Second Amendment. I think there's limits to it. I think Scalia's opinion on it was very well founded. It doesn't mean you can own a bazooka. You can't have an arsenal. The government's got a right through its own interest in clarifying what you can and can't own. But the very idea that you can't own a gun is unconstitutional. It says it right in the Constitution. It's not a penumbral right either. It's specifically outlined.
So he said the state has an interest to prevent you from owning certain types of guns.
Yeah, which I agree. I agree. I wouldn't want private citizens owning bazookas, or I know there's the whole AR-15 debate, and that gets into what is exactly an AR-15.
Yeah, where do you draw the line?
Where do you draw the line? And that's where, listen, different states have different. I have people in New York that get arrested on gun charges, and I can promise you, if they were in another state, they might not even be charged with a crime. But because New York has very stringent gun laws, not only are you charged with a crime, you're charged with a very serious felony, and it's hard to not go to jail in that situation. New York DAs take their gun laws very seriously, and that's the prerogative of the state.
What did you think of Dobbs?
I thought I kind of kicked the can down the road, to be honest with you. But at the same time, the thing with abortion that's always been the subject is even Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was the queen of thinking it was a penumbral right, came out and said, Roe was decided correctly. It was a good outcome, but it wasn't really good law. This really would have been better if we had a congressional act step in and codify it as an actual right. I don't know. I go back and forth on it. I do think it should be left to the states, but at the same time, I didn't have. My thing with Roe was this: as much as it might have been bad law, it was a good conclusion. So where do you balance it? You know what I mean? I do believe in the trimester framework. I think if you go by the trimester framework, it's a lot less restrictive. It's funny. A lot of people want to have European-style socialism in this country, except when it comes to abortion, because European countries are as restrictive as you can possibly get. Like, it's literally like after 12 weeks, you're done. That's it. You're not getting an abortion. It's illegal. So again, when you even have the matriarch of the right saying it was a good result with bad law. And again, we just came through not 4 years, but we came through a solid 2 years where there was congressional majorities in both the House and Senate from Democrats. Why didn't you just pass legislation making a national law on the subject? I don't get it. Personally, I think it's because they want to keep the wedge issue for elections. It is a very effective issue.
Right.
I would argue if the economy was better, it would have been predominantly what was the sole focus of the female vote.
Is that the same with immigration? They would have solved it but it takes away.
I think unfortunately we've been left with a situation where both parties were complicit in the immigration issue for years and years and years. One wanting cheap labor, one wanting to cultivate a voter base. I think it kind of backfired on the one wanting to cultivate a voter base, because if you look at border towns in Texas, you would think very heavily Hispanic community. The thing is, they have very heavy Judeo-Christian values.
Right.
So they're going to
that coming, motherfucker.
Yeah, I mean, really, like, what did you think was going to happen? Surprise! They don't like abortion. Like, you know what I mean? There's certain things they don't like. There's certain things the Democratic Party espouses. I don't think they like the abortion mobile in front of your convention. I think that was a tactical mistake, reaching out to that community.
These blue hairs, man. I don't like them.
It's a problem with that community. So, and unfortunately, I think we've now hit this. Like I said, we've hit a quagmire where the problem at the border was so untenable. I think in the last 2 months of the Biden administration, we had like 12,000 crossings that were stopped, which is actually kind of low. Something crazy. You look at the amount of fentanyl that's being processed through the border. To me, it's actually a national security crisis. I'm glad I'm glad we declared a state of emergency. I'm glad we declared the cartels to be terrorist organizations. As much as I'm the biggest non-interventionalist in the world, which I think most of our generation is, Republican or Democrat, because we grew up in the midst of the Afghan and Iraq war. So I think, especially if you were born from like 1986 until 2000, you saw the effects of your friends going to war and the end result, which was Taliban still in power. Yeah, nothing. We got nothing out of this. Literally no gains whatsoever. Then you said, well, why did we do this? But as much as I'm the biggest non-interventionalist in the world, I don't want ground troops going anywhere. If we're going to send ground troops anywhere, go to Mexico. Cut the heads of the cartel off, because we have, I think I saw in 2023, we have 23,000 pounds of fentanyl that were seized. Not that just went through, that were seized at the border. I mean, you know how much fentanyl that is? I think the fatal amount's something like, I know it's something ridiculous. It's some low-level amount. I forgot what the actual measurement is. Yeah. But it's so dangerous. And you're never going to stop the manufacturing because it's coming from China. But at the very least, you can cut the head off the supply and put a serious dent in it. because nothing else has worked. Obviously, the war on drugs is a failure. We've known that through 40 years of trying to fight it. Drugs won, okay? So the only way you're going to win at that
It's
point
time
is
to shift our focus on the war on drugs to the cartels in Mexico.
Exactly. Actually fight a real war and cut off the head of the supply.
We're actually not retracting it.
Yeah.
We're not ending it.
We're just refocusing it.
We're actually doubling down. That's pretty amazing. So,
because you have, I mean, personally, like, I think you have a government in Mexico that either doesn't want to solve the problem, or you have especially local and state politicians there that are totally on the take. So
I'd imagine it's just a matter of the cartels being completely in control.
Of course, if you can't have a diplomatic solution at a certain point, how many of our fellow citizens are going to die of this poison?
Right.
How much of the system are we going to clog up with people having possession charges? And it's a situation where I don't necessarily blame the addicts because it's so accessible and people don't know what they're buying. In some cases they do, which is crazy to me, but
I lost, my uncle, John. It's so crazy, dude. 5 years ago, he lost his son who was 23 at the time. Thought he bought a Xanax, found him in bed the next morning.
Yep.
And then 5 years later, my uncle, who I'll be candid about it, did have a problem with substance his whole life. Amazing guy, like a screenwriter. I could tell you the coolest stories about my Uncle John. But he did have a drug problem, and he ultimately had the similar fate. It was unbelievable. So, that's another reason why I was like able to cross the line to MAGA. I go, you know what? Fuck this shit.
Yeah, enough. Imagine a square-jawed, handsome, athletic version of me. That was my cousin Marco. Had a baseball injury, got prescribed Percocets.
Yep.
Needed something harder, progressed, but he didn't know he was buying fentanyl the day he overdosed.
Right.
You know what I mean? Certainly he thought he was getting Vicodin.
That's so terrible.
It's an epidemic, and it's something that I consider so much more of a security risk to my fellow citizens and would want our resources, our military might, and our dollars spent on than shipping it out in a foreign war. I'm sorry. We can't be the world police. It doesn't work. All it does is deplete resources here. All it does is divert attention from things that I think affect our common citizenry and fellow person more and more than something that's happening halfway across the globe.
Just makes you wonder what would happen if Trump had won in 2020. Or I don't know if you dispute his loss.
It's not that I dispute it. It's just I think long term it's better that he actually lost because he's coming in with so much more momentum now. He's coming in. He would have had an oppositional Congress had he won again. No question about it. And they were already trying to impeach him. There was already things they were trying to do to stop. We still had Russiagate as a big controversy. We were coming out of COVID.
I wonder if Ukraine would have happened.
I go back and forth on that. I don't know if it would or it wouldn't have. I think we would have had I think we would have had a diplomatic solution a lot sooner. I know he's already talking about Putin either coming to the table. The supposed Putin lover already coming to the table, already talking about how Vladimir's got to come to the table. Otherwise, he's just going to tariff the shit out of him. And they already, I think, I will say this. I think this war in Ukraine kind of exposed Russia militarily as kind of backward. Because it's been 2.5 years. They've made certain gains in the territory they want, but you would think a supposed military might like Russia would just be able, even with our backing in terms of giving Ukraine weaponry, would just be able to sweep through them. And they haven't. They've had they've been in for a much bigger, and that's a credit to the Ukrainian people and Ukrainian resolve. But at the same time, like I'm sure that a country that's essentially an oligarchy / mafia state cut corners on their military hard.
Right.
I'm sure of it. So they're probably using Kalashnikovs from like the early 90s and wondering, like, why have we not won yet? I don't know. Maybe because you're using 30-year-old weapons.
Right. No, that's interesting. So Trump's coming in, out with the old, in with the new. What a figure this guy is. What a historical figure, huh? Or
I gotta tell you, I couldn't like watching. I was in the barbershop watching his inauguration speech, the first one indoors. And it was just wild to me because he's just blistering the previous administration. And I wanted to be like, bro, they're sitting right there. Like, it's a little awkward. But at the same time, I'm listening to it. I'm like, he's not wrong. A lot of what he's saying is correct. I think we really diverted a lot of attention away from America first, from making sure we're taken care of. The old adage of charity starts at home. I find it untenable that I have clients that serve this country that are veterans that are living in shelters, but we have billions of dollars to ship to a foreign government, of which we have no idea where that went. No clue. For all we know, some of that could have been kicked back to the people that are proposing these bills. I wouldn't be surprised if it did. I think, and I'm not saying that there's not going to be I think there's a level of corruption in every government, unfortunately, but that's just me being a crazy anti-statist. I do tend to think, I am a little disappointed with Trump, and I do tend to think that he kept the TikTok, that he extended the TikTok ban solely because he wants to he thinks it'll help him with coming in with a certain demographic, with more youthful voters and stuff like that. Even though he's not running for re-election, I just think he wants more of their support, try to shift the culture, which I am actually in favor of. But I do think he only did this to effectuate a sale to one of his friends, whether it's Kevin Leary or Elon. I think he just figured, you know what, let's extend it. We'll force him to come to the table to find a buyer.
I'll pocket $1 billion.
Yeah, well, not him personally. He's not. I don't know if he'll get a finder's fee, but he's going to help out one of his buddies to buy an app that unquestionably has a bill. What would you say TikTok's market cap is at? I'm sure it's ridiculous. It's worth hundreds of millions, if not $1 billion. So why not help a buddy out and get him a distressed asset that a Chinese that why not get him a Chinese spyware company, which has been proven to be for pennies on the dollar, and then we can reform it after the fact.
So what about this cabinet of wealthy people that he has? It's cool. I mean, these are cool guys, right?
I mean, it's cool, but I think it kind of shows what an opportunist, only now is Zuckerberg coming out talking about how the Biden administration pressured him into culling speech, huh? Only right now, when we knew it. We knew it for 4 years, man. Yeah. Between the Hunter Biden laptop disinformation, which I love the fact that Trump revoked everybody's security clearance that took part in that, because it was a blatant lie the second it happened. Right. But I mean, only now that it's convenient are you going on Rogan, Zuckerberg, and are you showing up at the inauguration? I don't know. To me, it's just griftery. But
looking
at the same time, at the same time, man, I was
that Meghan Markle? No,
it was Bezos's girlfriend. And I'm looking at that, and it reminded me of the movie Selena, where Selena's dad is complaining that she's wearing a bra, and they're trying to compare it to a brassiere, and he's like, "It's a bra," because I'm looking at it, and I'm like, "What is that, Sue Ellen Mischke from Seinfeld? She's clearly wearing a bra." I don't know, man. If I was Bezos and I was worth billions of dollars, if I was Lex Luthor, I'd be like, maybe a nice dress, like me. You can have it low cut, you can still show a little cleavage. She's a beautiful woman.
Right.
I don't blame. Listen, that's just Darwinism that Zuckerberg is going to take. We're all cavemen. Right. Of course, he's going to look at it. Like, what's he supposed to do?
We're just in a different reality now. Zuck is human.
But it is so weird to see all the alphabet companies. Tim Cook is up there despite the amount of criticism he gave Trump. The head of Google's up there despite how blatantly antagonistic, how much they throttled any conservative media, how much they promoted certain stories and throttled other news stories. Now they're there to kiss the ring. So you know what? I hope it's not temporary. I'm not asking that anybody kiss ass. Okay. I despise sycophantery. It's part of the reason why I don't like Lindsey Graham. He was very anti-Trump until Trump became the clear nominee, and all of a sudden he's kissing his ass. You're a creature of survival. I can't take anything you say at face value. I just want even-handedness, man. That's all I want. If Trump does something wrong that you don't agree with, criticize him. I'd rather that be fact-based. I'd rather we didn't make up PP dossiers. And, I saw Colbert talking about how he did like a mimicky sing-song voice about how the alpha president needed to go inside because it was a little cold. And I was like, bro, you look like you're like 10. Like, this is ridiculous.
Colbert did that?
Yeah. Where he did the voice like that? And I'm like, bro, who's your writing team? You should fire literally every one of them. Who finds this funny?
What a disaster.
Whatever. It's childish. But at the same time, there's definite criticisms to be had. And you got to hold accountable. You got to hold your elected officials accountable because they work for us, man. That is a big part of the nativism of America First. I think we have an entire political class that forgot who they work for. I think it was 10 years ago at this point that Tucker came out with Ship of Fools. And I recommend anybody from any I used to tell my friends who were more on the left, I'm telling you, man, if you read this, you would agree with what he's saying, because it's very much a classist point of view of how we have an aristocracy in this country of idiots, morons. As long as you go to the right school, you have the right connections, you're going to get a certain position and you're going to be able to effectuate policy. But these people aren't getting there by merit. They're getting there by family name. I mean, look, to give an example, I know it's a superficial one. Meghan McCain did not go on The View because she's smart or looks good. It was her last name. She's a Nepo baby. You know what I mean? Yeah. Now imagine that, though, on a more insidious level to where people are effectuating policy because of just who their connections are. It's got nothing to do with merit.
That's like saying the college admissions, the legacy programs need to go. And that's a good argument.
I've always agreed with it. Every time that gets brought up in the context of eliminating DEI, where they're like, what about legacy programs? I'm always like, what about them? Sure, get rid of them.
Right.
Only
fair. It's so interesting, though, again, that MAGA is not necessarily... it's not like anyone's really a communist in MAGA, but MAGA could really mean wealth distribution as long as it's in this country. It could.
I think what it means is I think too much of our wealth has already been redistributed to either foreign initiatives like NATO, foreign entities like the World Health Organization, or in agreements that are totally wasteful like the Paris Accords. And nothing, NAFTA is another example. Nothing about that was done with keeping the American consumer, the American buyer, the American citizen in mind. It was all to enrich special interests, or to. I'll be honest, I don't know what the justification is as to why we spend so much on NATO compared to other countries. It's never made sense to me. All right, I think it should be proportionate. We're the richest country in the world. We should shoulder more of the burden. I understand that. But it's so out of whack. What's wrong with saying to the other member nations, who, by the way, aren't poor, okay? It's not like Germany's got an economic crisis right now. You got to kick in more. We can't just be shouldering all the burden because we have a country in which our infrastructure is crumbling. We have a homeless veteran crisis. We just have a homelessness crisis in general. Why should we have to have that? Why? When we have billions of dollars to send elsewhere, I don't get it.
Right. That is a good point. So is there a tension with the fact that Trump is palling around with all these rich guys? And I really don't mean to sound that.
I think there is. I think there's a huge.
By the way, I really didn't mean that to sound derogatory.
No.
But he has this rich crew and I'm a fan of all these guys. I look up to all of them.
Listen, Elon set me free on Twitter, so I'm always going to be
right
with him. You tell the Ayatollah to just die already.
There with
banned for 2 years.
The interests of the common man. You know, the people on the left say this is oligarchy.
Well, first of all, it's rich that they would say that, considering I didn't recall any complaints when George Soros was getting the Presidential Medal of Freedom at the White House. I'm just saying. So if you're going to have a problem with oligarchy, the guy literally does nothing besides. Every time I hear Citizens United, it's like, what about him? And no one ever has an answer.
On a political philosophy level, I guess the question is, these guys represent a free market view. They want to cut regulations and lower taxes. Is that bad for the common man? That's what I'm still trying to comprehend.
My biggest frustration with the messaging of his last tax cuts were, look, any initiative you have to cut taxes, the 1% is always going to benefit more because they pay more taxes. It just makes sense. If you're going to have tax cuts across the board, the people that pay more are going to get more of a discernible benefit. However, I forget. I wish I remember who the economic board was, but it was a bipartisan group that literally had to come out and say, no, off of Trump's tax cuts last time, some 80% of Americans saw a discernible benefit in their paycheck. It wasn't just the ultra rich, the ultra wealthy getting a bump in their paycheck. It was common citizens. Right. I think everybody's in favor of that, right? Especially considering where our tax dollars go to. It's wildly inefficient. I don't want my money going to some. I'll be honest. I don't want my money going to NPR. Why should it? Why should it go to NPR? Why do we need to have this anymore? Considering that, in my opinion, it's a partisan organization. Same with PBS. You know, listen, everybody has issues with where tax money goes to. It's just part of what we have to deal with. But at the same time, there's such waste. Like, I have no problem with keeping more of my money. I'll put it that way. And I think most of the voting populace would agree with that.
Right. And yet I come from this family of such hardcore leftists where it's just ingrained in me. The right thing to do is have more taxes, and
donate to charity.
Right.
Donate to charity then. We have charitable endeavors in this country. If you really want to make a difference and you feel as though your money would be better served, help. And by the way, I think honestly, it's an easier way to help the underprivileged is to find a charity that you're comfortable with, one that you know isn't run like a business, but is actually run like a nonprofit. You know, I'm not going to lie. I found it kind of revolting that you had certain politicians, Liz Warren being chief among them, that were trying to promote donate here for the California wildfires. Meanwhile, you go there, you're donating to Act Blue. This isn't which takes 5% off the top because they're a political organization. It's not a nonprofit. This is not your this catastrophe is not your way to bolster your campaign coffers. Okay, so it's no different than, for example, and I know this is personal to you too. If I want to donate to a breast cancer charity, I found one that I know is reputable, that I know goes directly to the people that need it. So I donate to Diva for a Day. I'm not about to donate to the Susan G. Komen Foundation.
Right.
Because there's not a board that's getting paid a salary. It's going directly to the people that need it. And I've always had that argument when it comes to people that want increased taxes. If you feel as though not enough of your money is being spent to help the underprivileged, go donate to charity.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a strong argument. I'll tell you. So zoom out and reorientate yourself with the last 48 hours. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling optimistic. I really am. I like his cabinet picks so much more this time than I did last time. As much as I thought it was ridiculous for Cory Booker to get up there and call Jeff Sessions a racist when he was literally marching with him arm in arm the year before in Selma or at Selma. Dude, we have cameras. Like you're on tape. I see you. I didn't like Sessions. I thought he was an antiquated dinosaur in terms of a view of the criminal justice system that I think needs to adapt a little bit. I do think we have a little bit of an over-incarceration problem in this country. I'd love to see federal declassification of marijuana for obvious reasons. I just think you're going to clear a backlog in terms of states actually prosecuting this. And I give a lot of credit to state AGs where it's still illegal, saying we're not prosecuting this. We're not dealing with it. Unless it's over a certain weight and you can make the argument that they're trafficking as opposed to imbibing. We're not dealing with this shit. It's nonsense. We have actual crimes we have to get to. Stop bothering us. But I'm encouraged. I like Bondi a lot. I thought she was very sharp in her answers. I think a lot of this with Hegseth and the 11th hour accusations are the same thing they tried to do to Kavanaugh in terms of the character assassination. Everybody that has a problem with him saying that, he doesn't have this credential or that credential. The guy is an Ivy League educated soldier who did 2 tours in Iraq. He's a demonstratedly bright guy. I'm sorry that he wasn't on the board of Raytheon or Lockheed Martin or Halliburton or one of these warmongering boards that gets rich off us perpetuating the war machine. I don't see that with him. So yes, I'm very encouraged because again, I do think a lot of our solutions could be handled diplomatically. I think we've had and it was so weird coming from the left, coming from Hillary, coming from Biden, that they almost took these hawkish foreign policy positions. I don't want to send ground troops anywhere we don't have to. Again, we're children of the Iraq and Afghanistan war. We saw the result. I think a previous generation would tell you all about how Vietnam was a quagmire that we had no business being in, the effect that it actually had on the soldier that you sent there. Because a lot of people didn't come home. The ones that did, unfortunately, dealt with all kinds of after effects, PTSD. They didn't have any sort of support or apparatus to help them. The VA has been in horrible shape for the last 30 years. I hope we get some reformation on that. Certainly, that is the one aspect where I think we can all agree. As much as we could debate universal health care, for an hour, but I think everybody agrees. You know what? When it comes to the soldiers, I have no problem with my tax dollars going to their medical care. I really don't. I think even in a divided time, I think 90% of the country would agree with that.
Yeah, right.
But I'm optimistic. I like a lot more of his cabinet positions this time around. I think they're a lot more prepared. I think the transition team's a lot more prepared. I think it speaks better when you don't have the absolute disaster that is Chris Christie heading your transition team.
I was just thinking about Chris Christie.
He's as subversive as he possibly can be. I mean, again, the one time in my life I voted Democrat was to vote him out of office because he was just such a disaster. And
was he? He wasn't a good governor?
He was a disaster. Just a lot of bully tactics, I always thought. The second he ran into an oppositional state senate, all of a sudden the big haughty-taughty fat man that was going to do all these things turtled and either compromised overwhelmingly or just dropped a lot of the initiatives he wanted, the pension crisis being the biggest one. He just turtled. I mean, almost immediately. Second Senate Democrats were like, no. He didn't have, what do I do? He had no solutions, no ability to reach across the aisle. He's not very dynamic. He's not a likable guy. So he's not going to be the one. He's not silver tongued, so to speak, classic politician like a Bill Clinton to reach across the aisle and just through sheer charisma actually be able to move legislation.
So Shapiro's that guy, you think, potentially for the Democrats, the only one who might have a chance?
Yeah, I think Newsom was really hurt by this. I think Newsom's just.
He was maybe gonna recover from COVID.
Yeah,
somehow.
I think you know what? I think 4 years from now, COVID will be in such a rear view that people won't care. He's a handsome guy that can lie with conviction, and that will win you a lot of elections, whether it's right or wrong. And that's bipartisan. You have that on both sides. But I think this really hurt him, and I think it's very, very important for Democrats that they don't have someone that can be seen as a coastal elitist. I think they need someone from a swing state. I think they tried that with Waltz, and he was just so uncharismatic, like the anti-charisma.
Yeah.
And just do it dude, you can't using football lingo that makes no sense that any football fan would read it and be like, what are you talking about? Wearing the hunter hat when it's just like,
sir, are you from this country?
I know, seriously, he was just so unlikable. Oh
my God. What a character. You think
personally,
Shapiro turned it down,
yeah,
or
I do. I think I can't imagine a scenario where they didn't offer it. How could you not offer it to him? He's a
right,
popular governor in a swing
right,
state that you
right,
absolutely have to have.
right?
And listen, I know there's a segment of the hard left, the Rashida Tlaibs of the world, that would have
Mm-hmm.
hated it just because of his heritage, which is fucking disgusting. Let's just be honest here. That's gross. Like, but I think enough of mainstream Democrats would have looked at him and convalesced around him. And I think more importantly, the independent portion of this country would have looked at him and said, you know what? I think he can cull some of Kamala's excesses. I think he's a sober guy. I think he has the ability to at least
Mm-hmm.
process things in a manner that isn't beholden to a far left that I think a lot of people are tired of.
Mm.
And I just look at their bench and who else? If it's not going to be him, who else? I guess you could say Whitmer up in Michigan.
Cory
Who else you
Booker,
got? Again, I think they're going to have a problem with anybody on the coast. I really do. And
right?
Booker doesn't have much of it. Not that record matters, because it really doesn't. Because if record mattered, DeSantis would have skated in the primaries before Trump got re-involved.
Yeah, he's heavy. He's a heavy hitter. Rubio too probably will be a contender, right?
Rubio will be. It depends how his Secretary of State stint goes. I mean, the thing with the cabinet is this: Trump fires a lot of people. So it's like a coaching staff. Today's offensive coordinator might be out the door in a year. You never know. What did Tillerson last? 2.5 years. But I do think Rubio is a little more in line. And again, I think the administration, I think the president specifically, is a little more savvy this time, in that just because you won the election doesn't mean you're not going to have subversive elements within your own government trying to effectuate their own agenda. And I think Trump sometimes is his own worst enemy. I think the John Bolton appointment the first time is the biggest example of that. He had everybody telling him, do not do this. Do not trust this guy. He's a chicken shit warhawk opportunist who will sell you out the first chance he gets. What happened? He wants to go into Syria and start a ground war. Trump's like, we're not doing that. So he resigns. And all of a sudden, Bolton with his walrus mustache looking like a skinny Wilford Brimley is on MSNBC. And I'm like, did you guys hate him? Aren't you guys supposed to be the pacifists? Right. I hate him.
Right.
Like, so I just, the Mr. Vietnam deferment, not enough wars for him. So I just never, again, there are self-inflicted errors that he made the first time that I'm hoping he kind of wised up on. I think he did, looking at the cabinet. You don't want a cabinet of sycophants and loyalists, but you want people that are going to effectuate your agenda. You have a stated agenda. This is what I want done. If you don't agree, let's talk about it. You're here to give me advice, to give me consultation. You're not here to actively Mark Miley. You're not here to, which he actually said this in a congressional hearing, that he would actually warn the Chinese if Trump decided a military engagement against them.
Heads
You're not
up,
here to do
boss
that.
is thinking about nuking you.
Oh, yeah, isn't that insane? That isn't, and of course he gets a blanket pardon, because of course he does, which I would argue, like, I don't know if you get blanketly pardoned treason, which I would argue that is, but whatever. Just slink away. Like, I want these people. The problem with these people is I want you to just slink away to your hole, take your ill-gotten wealth, and just leave everybody alone. But you know that they're going to be on the grift circuit for the next 4 years. You know they're going to be writing books. You know they're going to be in certain media criticizing everything the guy does, whether there's a meritorious basis. And I'm not saying there's not, but whether there's a meritorious basis or whether we're manufacturing collusion allegations again.
It does feel like the tide has shifted, though. I mean,
I
at
hope
least
so.
certainly with me.
I
mean, I like
so.
to consider myself a bellwether, in my own mind, And
you are, because you
right.
you are the prototypical person that's voted for both sides. So
right.
You absolutely are.
It's just like there's no going back, and it just becomes a question. Okay, I recognize the guy's competent. I recognize he's funny. I recognize. I mean, competent. How important is that, though? The competence.
It's incredibly important. It's all
deep. He's deep. He's nuanced. He's experienced. Hey, man, I don't know about his past as a businessman, as a human being, but
I can't disagree. I happen to find him to be hilarious. I think
he's funny as hell.
He's so funny. If people find him objectionable because they expect more out of the office, I'm not going to sit here and disagree with you. I'm just going to tell you, I don't need my president to be my best friend. I really don't.
Or a fifth grade school teacher.
Exactly. Yeah. If anything, I don't want my president to be a fifth grade school teacher, because I think they look at the world through a more compassionate lens. And this is going to sound very cold, but I think you need to have a little bit of a bastard in you to be an effective president. You have to make hard decisions that other people aren't going to make, because it's the right thing to do, but it might not be the most popular. It might be something that people are going to look at. Like, I'm telling you right now, It's amazing how for the last 4 years we haven't heard anything about immigrant detention centers. Get ready for the kids in cages narrative to start again. Get ready for it. It's going to start up again. And looking at those images, like, look, I'm a humanist. I don't want to see kids being held in detention centers. Like, it's a humanitarian crisis. At the same time, given, again, what a disaster the border was, how broken our immigration system is, and the fact that it was literally just done for the last 4 years, it's just you had a media not reporting on it. What are we supposed to do? What do you want the guy to do? He didn't create this situation. He inherited it.
Yeah, it's going to be a matter of how he responds now. It'll be interesting once he really gets into the flow of being back in office.
I think he needs to strike heavy and strike while the iron's hot, and do it while you have a congressional majority, because again, just the very nature of the midterms is that you get an output against the party in power. The opposition rises up because they feel it's their way to take a little bit of the power back. Happens with everybody. I mean, Bill Clinton was fairly popular as a president in 1994. They got trounced in the House and Senate. It's the way it goes. I don't know what the explanation is, whether people are more motivated. But that's just historically the way you look at the country. So right now you have 2 years. 2 years to really effectuate policy, 2 years to do what you want to do, 2 years to make the argument to the American people. And it's not going to be easy because he's not inheriting an easy situation. Our economy still is very sluggish. We still have an inflation issue. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with tariffs and how that affects it. I personally think that, look, I have a bit of an American exceptionalist outlook on the world. I personally think that if we've been the world's nanny and babysitter for so long, but if we wanted to turn around and tell these other countries, eat shit, if you want to manufacture products and sell them in America, you're paying the tariff. Eventually they're going to capitulate, because the alternative is that you cut off the biggest marketplace to your economy. It's not going to work. So, right. I don't believe it's going to result in the price increases other people do, but only time will tell. We're gonna see what happens, and that's the first 2 years is really his case. To me, it's his case to the American people. This is what I want effectuated. Not only that, it's the best case whoever his successor is, whether that's Vance, DeSantis, whoever comes out of the primary can make. Is look how wildly successful we were the first 2 years. Now, if they win, if they keep power in the primaries, great. You got carte blanche. Go have at it. You'd be ignorant to think it's going to happen if you look at historically what happens in American politics.
Right. What a figure this guy Trump is. He comes in armed with all these ideas and plans.
You do have to
How
say
unique is he?
It is the greatest comeback in American political history. Yeah. I don't care. And I know that's it might sound hyperbolic. The guy was impeached. He was charged with 34 felonies, which to me was blatant lawfare. To me, they aggregated a bunch of misdemeanors, totally disregarded the statute of limitations, and then said, have at it, charge him. They wanted this guy in jail. He was shot at. He was an inch, a head tilt, and a graph away from getting brained on national television. Dude. And now here he is, president of the United States. It is surreal in a certain respect. So I hope there is excuse my language, but I hope there is a little part of him that governs with a little bit of fuck it, because he shouldn't be here anyway.
Oh, he will, and he is. Oh, fuck.
I hope so, and I think you're seeing that with appointing Pam Bondi as AG, who I think is exceptionally talented. I'm really looking forward to seeing what she can do. I don't think Trump in the first term would have appointed Hegseth. He took more of a establishment, I want to appease these people line. He promoted Mattis, who a lot of people liked at the time. Mattis was a little bit of a war hawk, and we didn't get his way. He was in the Atlantic writing about what a national security risk Trump is. So, you don't want people that are sycophants, but also there's something to be said again with people that believe in your vision, are going to effectuate it, and if there is a disagreement, aren't going to go running to the first lib outlet to bury the guy and to undercut and to undermine.
Yeah. So much has happened, man, as you just beautifully summarized. And here I am, with you in that MAGA camp.
I'm optimistic. I am. Yeah. I'm very optimistic. Yeah. I want what's best for everybody. Obviously, I want more money in people's pockets. I want a more freer country. I was personally affected by this because, again, I was banned from Twitter for 2.5 years. I didn't say anything crazy. Every time I hear these Jonathan Capeharts or these people in the media talking about how Elon let loose all these far-right extremists. Yeah. Bro, you're talking about me, okay? Eat shit. There's nothing that I say on there that's not holy
Right.
milquetoast. I'm not here calling for any sort of racial strife. I fully believe in equality, blah, blah, blah.
Why not?
But
No, I'm just
yeah, I know. It's a preamble I don't have to get into. But the fact is, yeah, I did think that there was a story that was being suppressed, which was proven to be true, by the way. And I
Right.
vocalized it. Why am I?
That's
I,
why
I
you
gotta
got
get
that. Talking about the Hunter
well,
Biden.
it was the Ayatollah. It was Hunter Biden was the first warning, and then I did tell the Ayatollah to just die already because he said he'd death to America. Which should I have said that? Probably not. But you know, he's a you talk about an autocratic piece of shit. Like,
Yeah.
really? But he gets to have a Twitter account, but Trump got banned. Okay.
Right. Right. No, I can't imagine what it would have been like being a Trump supporter 4 years ago, 5 years, 6 years ago. I can't imagine.
It was very disenfranchising, and you know, I think it's interesting now to see the Robert Reichs of the world totally forego the private company defense that they had back when Twitter was effectuating their propaganda, what they wanted. Now all of a sudden it's got to be a public utility, blah blah blah, which I tend to agree with. By the way, I think we should treat it as a public square. Because if you classify it as a public square, then all of a sudden it's very hard for the government to intrude and say this is what I want done in terms of speech and calling it or promoting it, whichever one they want. I don't give a shit what government's in charge. If it comes out 4 years from now, the Trump administration was pressuring Zuckerberg to push certain political topics and ban others that were pushing dissent, they're wrong. They're wrong for doing it because you know what? In the free exchange of ideas, the one that's the most meritorious, I still think we're a smart, intelligent enough country to where the one that's the most meritorious is going to hold weight, whether I agree with it or not. Okay. At the very least, let's get it all out there. Let's have a debate. Do I think some things are beyond debate? Yeah. But I also think, again, we're a smart enough country to where if someone comes in and starts pushing racial strife, enough people left, right, and center are going to look at it and go, bro, fuck off. Like, we're not about that.
Yeah. It's always so interesting where the rubber meets the roads with these principles and then reality.
It really exposes people in terms of how committed to your ideology are you when it starts getting used against you.
Right.
So, and then again, that's my problem with Trump issuing an EO to essentially try to change the interpretation of the 14th Amendment. I agree with him in theory, but in practice, I think it's a really bad idea because you're setting a precedent that I don't want set. I don't want set, excuse me. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it, man. It's great to have you back.
Bro, always good to talk to you.
Yeah, it is. And seriously, as you know, man, I've been searching for my political identity, and I appreciate I just realized how knowledgeable you are. That's why
Thanks,
it's
man.
not just that you're my buddy,
I appreciate it, and I love the fact that you're doing that because I think a
Yeah.
lot of people in your situation, and I think the nice thing about searching for a political identity is you voted a certain way. And I think certain rhetoric's going to entrench you in that position just because it's so antagonistic. But there's nothing to stop you. You're not beholden to anybody. You know,
No.
if things don't work, you can easily go to the other side and look for their solutions. And I think that's how it should be. I think you need an engaged populace and an engaged voter base to get the best out of your country. You get what you vote for.
Right.
It's that simple.
Right. I am struggling on whether or not I should change the name of the podcast. What's your 2 cents on that?
I don't think so. Because I think during the Trump administration, he's going to do things you agree with and disagree with. So
right on.
You're still searching.
Yeah.
You haven't landed.
No. I did something big. It was a big milestone. I voted for the guy and it felt like a big deal.
Yeah.
But I haven't arrived yet. I would agree. So, well, can you do this again sometime?
Yeah. Anytime you want, man.
All right, brother.
Seriously, I love coming on.
Appreciate it. Great to see you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Yeah. Peace out, guys. Thanks for the comments. Later.